Hey, this is Rick from Outdoor Emergencies at hikingemergencybeacon.com. And somebody asked me a question this week about if the power went out, what kind of satellite messenger or communicator would I recommend? But before I give you my advice, please like, subscribe, share, and turn on notifications so you'll be alerted as soon as I put out new videos. Now, when I think of power going out, we're not talking about a short outage. I mean, you could. I've seen outages in different places where there was an ice storm, snowstorm, high winds. In fact, one time we were without power for a week. And of course we had cell phones, so the cell phone service was still working. But if you're without power and it affects the cell phone service, this is something that actually can happen on a regular basis around the country. But I think what this person was asking, in fact I know it was if there was something major, like a major outage of power across a region, a large area, for, you could use your imagination about why that would happen, but what would I recommend? And that's a little bit of a challenging question, because the first thing I would say is, depending on what messenger or communicator you have, I would probably stick with the same company, the same brand. Say if you have an ACR bivy stick, well, it's probably best if everybody has an ACR bivy stick in your family or friends. But you don't really need to have the ACR bivy stick. Say if you have a Zoleo ACR bivy stick, somewhere global hotspot, I think even the Spot X, in fact I know also the Spot X, they have dedicated phone numbers that are built in or that are assigned to those devices. So you can message each other if you have the phone number. And the reason I say I group those together is because you can message each other and initiate a message between those different devices, those different companies. The problem is with Garmin. With Garmin, say if you had an ACR bivy stick, you cannot initiate a message. I don't care if you even have the Garmin inReach email of the person. You cannot initiate a message to a Garmin inReach device first. The Garmin user has to initiate a message to you, and then you can communicate. Another way to communicate is, say if somebody has a map share link or on their computer or phone, they can initiate a message to you that way. But that's the only way to initiate a message. But what I'm talking about here is there's a major power outage and your phones aren't even working. So how do you message people if your phones aren't working? Well, that would be with a satellite communicator. But I want to throw a little note out here too. Your satellite communicators have to be charged and you have to be able to recharge them. So what are you going to do if you're out of power for a long period of time? And one way is you could carry a portable charger, which they're different amounts of power, and also you'd want to get as good of a small portable charger as possible. It's kind of basically the same size as your cell phone. But then you can recharge your device and your phone if the phone even has access to cell service. But another way is if you have a marine battery. And I'll have links to some of these below, the marine battery and the portable charger. But I have 3 marine batteries because I go out camping, and sometimes in fact, all the time I go camping. It's remote camping, but I'm in a big tent, so I want to be able to charge things. Well, those marine batteries, if you're careful with them, can last a week or more, depending on how much you're charging. So just be careful and mindful of that you need to be able to recharge your devices. So again, let's go back to why the Garmin or why these other ACR or Spot, Zoleo, etc. If you have a Garmin, and a lot of people have Garmins, then I would say stick with Garmin, because if you have a Garmin inReach device, then you can message each other. If everybody has inReach messengers or communicators, then you can initiate messages. You don't have to wait for somebody that has a certain device to message. If it's in reach, you can initiate the message, and it's so much nicer and easier than if you're having to deal with somebody who has an ACR bivy stick or a Zoleo, because again, the Garmin user would have to initiate the call or the message to them. Now that that's out of the way, let's get to what I would really recommend. And I would say, honestly, any of these will work. I would just, hopefully you don't have different manufacturers. But from my experience using these satellite communicators, if I were without power for a long period of time, whether it's weeks, months, say something like the inReach Mini 2. It's a very small device, and you have to arrow around on the sides. There's an up and down arrow, and there's OK and a back arrow. And you have to arrow around and select the letters and numbers. You can do it, and I've done it several times, and you might even get really good at it, but it takes some time. Versus the Garmin GPS Map 67i or the Explorer Plus, but specifically on the 67i, because that's what I've tested thoroughly, and it's one of the most current devices Garmin has. It's an all-in-one device. You can see topo maps on the screen. You can message. It's much easier to message on the 67i versus the Mini 2. And what's great about that device also is, as long as the satellites are still operational, and there's no guarantee of that, but if that's the case and they're operational, not only can you message, but you can also see where you're at. There's topo maps on the device. If you have the Mini 2 and you want to see topo maps, you can't see them unless you're synced with your smartphone. Well, in an emergency situation and things are down and you don't have access to your smartphone because maybe the battery's died or cell service is out, you can use imagination how bad things could be. I would not want to be dependent on having to have the Bluetooth to access my smartphone to be able to see topo maps. I would rather have an all-in-one device. So I would go to the Explorer Plus. Now that's a bit older device now, and they are supporting it, Garmin is, but it is basically discontinued. You can't buy it unless it's used. You cannot buy it new anymore from Garmin. But the 67i, the 66i also, but the 66i had a bad battery. The 67i has a much better battery, so that's where I would really recommend going with the 67i, because everything's on the device. You can see the satellites, you can see topo maps, you can get weather, and of course that depends on if those services are still available, but you can message and get SOS if that service is available. And but if some of the services are still available, say at least just the messaging, and it'd be nice if the topo maps were available too. You could see that information, where you're at, where you're trying to get to. If you're trying to get from one place to another and transportation is locked or impossible, you could, if you're walking or whatever, hiking, you can see where you're going, but then hopefully then you can still message. But you can message on the device, and it's much easier than a Mini 2. So my base recommendation here is I would prefer myself to have a Garmin, and everybody in my family to have a Garmin. And if we are separated, and we then got to make sure, and hopefully this is set up ahead of time too, you have to have the subscription to message. Now this throws another whole question in place is, well, if the power's out and you have a subscription, but it's accessing that subscription somehow, will you still be able to message? And that's an unknown. I have no idea. Only maybe somebody at Garmin or in the NSA or whatever might know about that. But those are some things that I would want to have, those satellite communicators and messengers, in case there was an emergency. So hopefully things do still work, but there's no guarantee. So anyway, these are just some things to think about. And if you've got the money and you want to prepare ahead of time, that's my advice. I stick with the same brand, and if you've already got one, then you might want to stick with whatever you've got. But if you don't, then I would recommend a Garmin, and I would also then recommend something like the Garmin GPS Map 67i as an all-in-one device. That's my top recommendation. They are a bit expensive. They're $600-700 or so, but in emergency, you won't care. Well, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, anything like that, please leave a comment below. And thanks for joining me here today on Hiking Emergency Beacon. Please like, subscribe, share, and turn on notifications so you'll be alerted as soon as I put out new videos. And if you'd like to support Hiking Emergency Beacon, there's a link in the description below. And I'll see you back out here in Colorado in the next video.